All right, so here's the rubric that we'll be using, and if you note that the description is, while respecting intellectual property, we want you to present information, findings, and supporting evidence, conveying a clear and distinct perspective, such that listeners can follow the line of reasoning. Alternative and opposing perspectives are addressed, and the organization, development, substance, and style are appropriate to purpose, audience, and range of formal and informal tasks. That seems like a lot, and it seems like teacher speak, and it is. Here's essentially what this means. This means that you've done your research, you have synthesized the information, you've taken all of the stuff that you have, and you've boiled it down to the important stuff, and then this should be clear to you, conveying a clear and distinct perspective. What is your perspective? What is your viewpoint on this? How are you trying to persuade me? And what side are you on? Is that clear? Is that distinct? I need to be able to follow your line of reasoning. You need to be able to say, I think this, my opposition thinks this, here's why I'm right. It should be organized, and the information that you put in there should be substantive. It should be meaningful. It should be relevant. In addition to that, we have the actual rubric here. I'm going to go through some of that. You'll notice that the criteria: preparation, understanding of research, content, logical and sequential, and documentation. There's sort of 4 levels to this. You're either exceptional, admirable, acceptable, or you've simply attempted the task. As far as preparation goes, I want to see that your research is extensive, your content and the medium are extremely appropriate for the topic. Obviously, the content goes without saying. The information about the topic with which you are trying to persuade. The medium, this is simply, are we talking right now about an interview? Are we talking about an infographic? Are we talking about a podcast? What is it that that's the different mediums. It's the plural of media, right? So what type of content? How are you, what is the vehicle for you to explain your content? What is that medium? So that medium has to be appropriate for the topic. That's if it's exceptional, and I'm going to let you read admirable, acceptable, and attempted. Next is understanding of research. Shows an in-depth understanding of topic. I want to feel like you are knowledgeable on your topic. We always say, like, are you the expert? Expert is a big term, but if you're knowledgeable on your topic, I'm with you. I'm on board. I need to know that you've thought more than just on the surface about the topic. And we also know that oftentimes these arguments are like onions in that they have layers. I want you to peel some of those away and talk about, well, okay, so I'm arguing this, but then that brings up this problem and this problem and this problem, right? So I want you to be able to dig down into those underlying concepts presented, and that's what's here. And again, under understanding of research, I'll let you read what's admirable, acceptable, and attempted. Under content, I want to see that effort behind the scenes is evident. This means that your thoughtfulness about your content is clear. In that, let's say you picked distance learning works. You're putting in the right work. You're not just picking the first person, and we're talking about an interview. You're not just picking the first person you found or first person to interview. You're really being considerate of who am I trying to reach and what am I trying to do to get the right person to interview. It's not just the first person you thought of, but you're starting to look at, okay, what do they bring to the table? Would they be a good interview? No, this person might be a better interview. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to interview that first person. I'm going to go to the second person because they have more to offer me. That's kind of what I mean by exceptional. As far as admirable, acceptable, and attempted, I'll let you read that. Logical and sequential. Your content is presented in a logical order. This obviously follows the line of questioning in an interview. I'll want to see that each question sort of builds on the one previous. Maybe it's an infographic. aesthetically, I want it to be pleasing to the eye. I want my eyes to be able to flow through the information well. It shouldn't be what we might call convoluted, lots of lines, lots of graphs, lots of words, but done in such a way that creates a nice flow. And the same holds true for like a podcast or a research paper, of course, as well. And I will let you read admirable, accepted, and attempted. And finally, documentation. You are going to have to do research with this project. It's just the nature of the beast. You are not knowledgeable enough on this topic to speak from your own experiences and your own sort of research. Which, if you are, let's ditch that topic and pick a new one, because my goal is to get you to try something new, to step out of your comfort zone, obviously. So I'm going to need to see the research that you've done. Tell me about that research paper that you found. Tell me about who it was that you interviewed and why they were a good interview, or a good interviewee. What made them valuable to your purpose. I want to see that documentation, of course, done in MLA format. So this is your rubric for this persuasion project. If you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Hi guys, Eileen Smith here, and I want to introduce you to the Podbean mobile app. It's great for listening to podcasts, but you also can use it to record your podcast. So let me show you how to record a podcast episode inside of the Podbean app. Sign up for an account. Of course, it's absolutely free. And when you open up the app, you're going to just tap on the red record button. Now, this app is available on iOS as well as Android. And you'll see the interface, which is really slick. Okay, you can add effects, booing, cheering, claps, so forth. All right. You can add music. We're going to come back to the different music tracks you can add. There's echoes. So if you wanted to make it sound like you're at the church or in the classroom, it's just a different way for your voice to sound like you're in a different setting. I'm not a fan of that option, but you may want to use that just for a specific segment of your podcast. Then there's also tone. I would just leave this one at 0, but you can experiment with it if you want. Okay, so now let's talk about the music. Let's go back into the music tracks. They have added so many different genres of background music now that you can add. However, when you're in the recording mode, you only can have 3 available during a specific recording. Now, of course, you can always delete one and then go back and add another for each segment that you record. You also, at the bottom of the screen there, you see that you can import music. So if you've got music on Dropbox, there's other locations like Google Drive, all right? Or you could just bring it from your library on your iPhone. So great ways that you can actually import music into this app to use as your background music. Now, I recommend that you control the volume level of that background music. Now, we're not going to be able to listen to the background music at this time, but I'll add in a track for you. So just take a listen to some of the background tracks they have. This one's called Spirit. This one is Rise of the King. Are you ready? Are you ready to start your podcast? Hey everyone, it's Eileen Smith here, and I wanted to talk to you about getting started with a podcast.
infographics. Now, the word infographics, it just in the last 5 years has skyrocketed, and you kind of hear it, and it is a big part of visual communication now. And so I think it deserves its own series, and I'm going to be doing probably about 6 or 7 videos. But to start off with, the first thing I want to do, rather than jumping into showing you how to create infographics, is to show you what makes a cool infographic. So what makes a good infographic pretty much comes down to an effective infographic. Effective infographics are composed of a few different attributes. They're well designed, they tell a good story, and also they are easy to understand. They give you a visual aspect of content in a manner that is easy and snackable. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is that an effective infographic tells you a good story. So as with presentations, you got to tell a story through infographics. Infographics are pretty much tall form formats of a presentation. They're basically tall versus multiple slides. This is a very good example. It pretty much actually is, it starts off well. It's about 5 minutes about your digestive system, but the problem is that as you scroll down and as you move down, it ends abruptly, and it kind of has a poor narrative. What you want to do instead is to have a good story to tell. So take readers by the hand and actually guide them through the visuals. This one about airport hacks, it actually tells you a story throughout the process. So as you go through, it tells you different aspects of how to get through an airport and different tips and guides on hacking through an airport. Now, number 2 is you want to take your users on a predefined journey. So where do you start and where do you end? And along the way, you want to fill between the gaps and tell them the story and actually give them a narrative. This one is not really a great example. The problem with this infographic is that there really is no sense of a beginning and an end. And it kind of looks like a soup of letters and numbers. The problem is that by just looking at it a few seconds, you have a hard time understanding what has been, related to you. Now, however, this example here, this one, what it does is it allows you to communicate your message effectively. It is composed of harmonious colors. It's not a very complex design. It's actually very simple. But at the end of it, as you go through it, you are enlightened and also entertained. Now, number 3 is you want to provide a new angle. One of the most common mistakes that I see designers make or non-designers make when they create infographics is this format where they create a list. In a way, it's a little bit better than a bullet list where you have visuals composed with supplementing the text. But however, at the end of the day, it's not really a true infographic. A good infographic, it uses unconventional angles to inform your audience. So this one I really love. It basically tells you the ingredients of chicken noodle ramen. So what it's done is taken the ingredients and broken it down into one simple, easy to understand, snackable visual. So that's a perfect example. You want to provide a new angle whenever you can. Number 4 is you want to have practical value. So always ask yourself, when you're creating an infographic, does it bring value to your audience? Does it inform them? Does it give them something different that they're not aware of? Or give it to them in a more easier to understand aspect? So we actually created an ebook on infographics, and in the Visual Learning Center, we analyzed over 200 plus most shared infographics at Visme. And one of the things that we found out is that a lot of the infographics that are mostly shared, they provide a tangible benefit to the readers. So they are a compilation of difficult tasks, and they make them easier to understand. So for example, it might be a visual cheat sheet, there might be how-to guides. This one is a great example. This infographic is about the history of ice cream. So it goes throughout the different years and actually tells you about the evolution and also where we are today with the, one of the most commonly consumed snacks being the ice cream. Next is your content. The infographic should be well structured. So you want to organize when you have a lot of information. And that's the thing. Infographics are meant to take large amounts of information and make them easy to understand. And that's the problem with a lot of the infographics these days is there's a lot of information and people typically take that and they don't really concentrate on the key points and they just put it all together. So this infographic has a lot of content, a lot of information. And it also kind of has been processed in a way that it's a little bit hard to understand. You kind of don't know where your eye is supposed to follow. However, this one, what they've done is they've broken it down into sections. So you want to break your infographic into a section, and each section, let it concentrate on a specific message. And so that way the user and the viewer can understand the message in just a few seconds. Now, number 6, you want to send one key message. So when creating an infographic, concentrate on one key message. If it's too complicated of a design, such as this one, it's very hard to understand. It kind of beats the purpose of an infographic. Now, if this was, for example, geared towards the engineering community with very large pieces of data and complex data, I can understand why it would be created that way. But we're talking here about the general audience. We're talking about mass producing or mass share of infographics and allowing your audience to be able to view it, find something interesting, and also be able to actually store it for later. So one of the tips would be to, when you're creating yours, to ask someone else that wasn't involved in the process to view it. If they don't understand it, the challenge is going to be that others may not as well. So this example here, it's actually very neatly done. It's a radial design, and what it's doing is talking about the paid leave maternity. So the US clearly is 0 weeks maternity leave, and then the UK has surprisingly 40. Iran has actually 12 weeks. So it's a pretty cool way of presenting you the information in very easy, snackable content. Now, let's talk about 7. It should be visually appealing. And that's a very common mistake amateurs make. There is no visual appeal to this design. There's way too much text, and it kind of looks like maybe it's a page out of a book. And that's a big failed, and it's a big no-no when it comes to creating compelling infographics. What you do want to do instead is to concentrate on a clear title and take advantage of clear user real estate. And also, this one has a very harmonious, clean design to it. I would actually want to, bookmark this and probably look at it later on, or share it on my Twitter and Facebook and so on. So that's a great example. Number 8, you got to have accurate and well-researched information. So one of the big sins in data visualization and infographics is misleading your readers. You want to do research, and you want to make sure you don't provide inaccurate or incomplete information. So this example here, although it's actually neatly designed, in a closer look, it actually exaggerates the results of a study. Instead, what you want to do is you want to handle information responsibly. So utilize useful tips backed by facts. So if you do your research and actually provide tips that have research behind them, proven research, then in that aspect, you're going to have a much better tailored infographic for your audience. And 9, last but not least, is make copy short and sweet. This is a perfect example. It's very similar to the last one that I showed you. The problem is that it's a very common amateur mistake. We see this all the time when people create infographics on Visme and other tools, is that they just copy-paste content onto their design. The problem is that you are creating an infographic. Infographics are supposed to take useful information into bite-sized pieces and to allow the user to be able to easily understand that. It kind of beats this one, defeats the purpose of a visual communication. This one is a great example, though. So perfectly, what it's doing is it has a catchy headline. The design is pretty clean. There's a nice contrast on the text over the background, so you can easily understand and see the information. There's visuals supported by very small pieces of content. So the key messages are supported by visuals. So there you have it. This was 9 attributes of what makes a good infographic. And on the next episode, I'm going to actually talk about the different types of infographics, where I'm going to talk to you about timeline, process, infographics, and a series of others. And that way you can actually, when you create yours in the future steps, in the future series, you will be able to understand and know what type of infographic is going to accompany the type of content that you want to present.
Hey YouTube, what's up? I'm going to show you how to easily, and I do mean easily, create a simple infographic using Canva. So the first thing you're going to do is go to canva.com, create an account if you haven't already, and then you're going to be logged in. Now you can come up here to use custom dimensions, which is what I'd recommend, and we're going to set it to 1500 by 1000 pixels and click design. Now, what a lot of people don't realize about Canva is that you can actually search for categories of images and not just specific images. So you can search for infographics, and Canva will bring up the shapes that you can customize for infographics. So for this really simple infographic, we're going to do Pinterest user stats. But let's start with the title. We'll come back to the infographics. Let's go to text, and I want something kind of rectangular. Let's just choose this. We're going to type Pinterest user stats. And let's drag this so we can get more of the page here. Okay, so we know it's centered when we see that line. So now let's do our percentages. So we're going to go back to infographics again. And let's use this thing that looks like a lollipop. Just going to drop it there. We're going to change it to 75%. And we can change the color of the lollipop. Let's do that. And then for our text, we'll make it black. So we can now copy this entire lollipop with the text by hitting copy and then just move it over. And when we see those two lines, we know that it's centered. So now we need a label. Oh, we've got to change this to 25%. So now we need to label our lollipops. Let's go to the text category. And we're going to scroll through here a little bit. Let's grab this. There like that. It's a little big, so let's take the handles, drag it, kind of move it over. We've got that vertical line, so we know it's centered right there. So I'm going to release, change the text to women. And now we can copy this, drag it on over so we get our little lines. We know it's centered. Type men. Bam. How easy is that? Now we can also add a background if we want, or you could leave it white. It's up to you. That, it's a little too busy. That could work. So you guys get the idea. It took me, what, 3 minutes to do this? Maybe 4? Very, very simple. And obviously you can do a whole lot more. One thing I also wanted to mention, if you happen to drag something on your canvas and maybe, for example, this 75% was in front of the woman banner and you wanted to move it to the back, you can always click this back and it will move that image behind the other image. So there you have it. You can use these for your social media feeds, for your blog posts. It's just a fun way to liven up your content. Enjoy.
Hey YouTube, I'm Tony Masilis. I'm a producer here at the CBS Evening News, and I have the pleasure of working with Katie Couric on a very regular basis.
Pleasure.
It's a pleasure. And you're obviously known for your interview skills. So there's this new channel at YouTube called the Reporter Center, and they wanted us to just ask you a few questions about what makes a good interview.
Okay.
So maybe the first question would be, what makes somebody a good interviewer?
Well, I think it's really important, Tony, to be a gracious host, because I think the more comfortable you make someone feel, the better interview you'll ultimately get. So I know that in terms of body language, I always try to be very warm and welcoming, and I think it's really critical to put someone at ease. I think also you have to calibrate your tone depending on what interview you're doing. If I'm talking to David Duke about, anti-Semitism or racism, obviously I'll have a very different tone. I'll be much more pugnacious than I would be when I'm talking to someone who may have suffered a personal tragedy. So I think it's really important to be very empathetic in some cases, and then to know when you're going to be loaded for bear and really try to elicit important information from someone who may be a bit oily and not direct in answering your questions.
How do you prepare for an interview?
Well, I try to do a combination of explaining what I can in the body of the question without going on and on. And I try to ask questions, obviously, that don't require a yes or no answer, because that's a disaster, because you're left kind of with a lot of dead air. And depending on who I'm talking to, I fashion my questions that way. And I sometimes go through them and think, well, how is this person likely to answer this? And what would be an appropriate follow-up? And knowing what they've said in previous interviews or their positions on various issues, I think, well, how can I go at this another way? Sometimes it happens spontaneously, obviously, when someone doesn't answer your questions. But at other times, I think you can predict appropriate follow-up questions.
It might sound a little bit Captain Obvious, but listening is probably really important, right?
Very, very. Nothing is worse for me than as a viewer to watch someone go down a laundry list of questions and not explore something with a little more depth after someone has answered a question already. To not pick up on something, maybe an inconsistency or something that may be news, and follow up on that and use that as the springboard to go into a whole different area. I think you need to use your questions as sort of a template, but you have to be willing to listen, as you said, Tony, and really veer off in a totally different direction. I can't stand it when people don't have the ability to do that. I'm like, it makes me crazy.
Now, that being said, have you ever had an interview go pretty far south on you where you're sitting there like, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, you know, it is hard. Sometimes people freeze. Sometimes they're just cranky. I had an actor who I interviewed, who shall remain nameless, who just didn't want to be bothered. It really annoyed me because I was giving him a lot of time on national television and he clearly didn't want to be there. But one member of the Flying Walendas, I know, why was I interviewing them? This woman answered every question with a monosyllabic answer, and it was very frustrating to kind of get her to elaborate. And then Bobcat Goldthwait, the comedian, I sort of missed the memo that he screams, so I kept asking him, why are you yelling at me? And I didn't realize, stupidly, that was part of his shtick. That was
Did you know who he was?
really embarrassing. I kind of knew a little bit about who he was. Now I certainly know all about him.
Oh, well, I'm sure you do. The hard way, right?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
learned about Bobcat.
Exactly.
Any last-minute tips that you want to give to people? Anything that anybody starting out in the business might want to know?
Well, I think you should remember who you're serving, your audience. You're trying to inform them. You're trying to illuminate a certain subject, enlighten people. And I think you need to keep that in mind. This isn't a self-aggrandizing exercise about how much you know. It's not an opportunity for a gotcha moment. I think it's really to shed some light on how someone thinks and their position, and to allow them to communicate. And I think if you allow your interview subject to communicate whatever message he or she might have at that moment, then you've done an effective job.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's time for me to get back to the other side of the camera where I belong.
I like you here, Tony.
Oh, well,
Come on.
hey, it feels pretty comfortable being in this light.
Why
Anyway,
don't we switch places?
yeah, exactly. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.